Okay, I said I was going to do two of these, Michael Brown, and this is going to be the truth again, because there's a lot of other points, but I did a video before this, and there's time constraints that fall between some guidelines. And I went on a talk about, my kids' art and the window of opportunity you have for that. And then I went on about how the first solar system was actually deployed in 1883 in New York. And anyways, so I've already wasted 30 seconds of this video. So let's get back to some of the points that these are commonly asked questions in contracting and specifically the solar industry, but a lot of it has to do with contracting in general. And my answers are going to reflect a lot of just general contracting because I've been doing contracting and construction my entire life. In fact, my father used to drag me around because he was a PE for as a mining engineer, which meant subways and all kinds of other construction and stuff. So I'm very familiar and very well rehearsed in contracting and dealing with those types of subjects. So we dropped off after talking about module level electronics and the pros and cons to having a lot of components versus a few components, right? And, a lot of components gives you a possibility of a lot of different points of failure, and, having fewer components means that a failure of one piece could cause a larger failure. So there's pros and cons, right? So the probability of some type of failure and some type of problem increases with the amount of components. You reduce the amount of components and the probability of a failure reduces by that fraction. However, if that probability happens, if that event happens, now you have something that is taken out and failed proportionately to that component in your system. So pros and cons, honestly. And so but however, overall, very similar performance, very similar reliability overall. So it's kind of buyer preference. Or your contractor, because your contractor is going to probably have some preference and stuff, and I would defer to, or at least listen to the counseling of your contractor if you trust your contractor. And if you don't trust your contractor, get another contractor. Okay, so then we go into what is the difference between a grid-tied solar system and an off-grid solar system. Well, a grid-tied solar system shares electricity with the utility. It's like the tide, the water, right? Comes in and goes out, comes in and goes out. You're generating electricity here, the utility's generating electricity here. You use what you generate here. If you use less than what you're generating, you use everything that you're using, and the excess goes back to the grid and goes to your neighbors where they get electricity and what have you. Sun goes down or there's a storm and you're using more than the solar system is generating, and then it comes in from the utility. So that's grid tied, right? Whether you have batteries or not, if you're grid tied, that's the way it works. If you have batteries, it'd be an off-grid solar system. And batteries, if you are grid-tied and you have renewable energy, or you have reliable electricity and you haven't had any power outages and you aren't expecting power outages and you have underground utilities and your neighborhood is less than 10 years old, I don't recommend you getting a storage system. And the reason being is it's hugely expensive. And very often in this industry, in the solar industry, most of the sales reps that are selling that stuff don't know how to size them, don't know how to adequately present to the consumer the reality of what they're going to be able to produce and what they're going to accurately consume over time in kilowatt hours, and also in actual any given point in time draw off of the system and what they can power. if somebody tells you something, somebody's trying to sell you a battery backup system or even generators, make sure that they show you some training outside of the manufacturer or the company they work for that makes them an expert to do so. Seriously, you got to do that. And I have all that training. I have that training and more. I've got tons of it. And I'm sitting here saying, and I have invested thousands of dollars specifically in storage and battery systems and sizing and designing and operation and maintenance. And I'm not the guy sitting here, and with all that investment in that training and that knowledge, I'm not the guy that's going to try and sell you a battery system unless you need it, unless you really need it. And that's the only time, which goes to an off-grid solar system. So an off-grid solar system would mean that you are operating off-grid, whether it be a trailer, a tiny home, or you live further away from where you could get access to reliable electricity, and you want an off-grid solar system. And that is going to be a lot larger than what you would need if you're just trying to offset your kilowatt hours and you were doing just a grid-tied solar system that with no batteries or storage. What you're doing is while the sun's up, you're trying to generate all the kilowatt hours that you would use 24/7 in a 24-hour period. Your consumption in kilowatt hours, you're trying to generate that number in kilowatt hours while the sun's up. Okay. So, and that's the way it works. If you're dealing off grid, you are, whenever the sun's not up and you're not generating more electricity than you're consuming in an off grid solar system, then you're pulling off of the batteries, which means to put energy back into a battery, depending on how deeply discharged your battery is, it could take 2 times the amount of kilowatt hours that the battery is rated at, put back into it in order for it to stick in that battery. And that's very layman's terms on how it works. But what you are is you're jumbling up the electrons that are currently starting to straighten out. This is, I shouldn't get into it like that, but that's the reality, right? So as a battery discharges, all the electrons and everything that are jumbled up and locked together within the battery, stored in the battery, what happens is they start to flow, and as they flow, they straighten out. Okay, and then when you're fully discharged, that means all the electrons are lined up. Okay, it's now a conductor. It's not, there's no storage to it at all. And in order to get those jumbled back up, you've got to ram a whole bunch of electrons back into the battery and get them all crammed and tangled up again. Okay, and that's a layman's way of explaining how a battery storage works. Doesn't matter whether it's lithium, doesn't matter whether it's lead acid. The only way it doesn't work that way is if you were doing a gravity-fed water system or something like that, something that would be mechanical, like winding springs, kinetic energy, like they have all kinds of other types of large utility scale storage that's not batteries. So your expense just gets astronomical. However, there are places, especially in the islands in the Caribbean and in very remote locations, where it makes sense. And I've done some humanitarian stuff out in Haiti after the very first earthquakes and stuff like that, where we did a whole bunch of off-grid stuff down there, and they know how to use it. They really do. And what they do is they just go to bed early. Turn everything off and go to bed early and save their batteries. Okay, we're going to hit another one in just a minute, but I'm coming into those time constraints. All right, Michael Brown, Truth About. We'll hit some more things. Just talked about grid, on-grid, and off-grid solar. And now we're going to go to something else. All right, talk to you soon.